In this review, you'll see the good and the bad of the Fujifilm X-Pro3. You'll see sample photos and detailed hands-on demos of its features. Hey photographers! The Fujifilm X-Pro3 is a camera you can't possibly appreciate until you hold it in your hand. This camera brings back some real 20th century photographic enjoyment. Or some aggravation, as it's quite unique in its layout and its functionality. The X-Pro3 is a mirrorless camera with an electronic viewfinder, but it also has an optical rangefinder. And it's the most sophisticated optical viewfinder that I've seen. The X-Pro3 is like a puppy. It sits there patiently, but you know it wants to go for a walk. The APS-C size 26 megapixel X-Trans sensor pairs nicely with Fuji's lens collection to take sharp, detailed photos with great contrast and rich colors, although the color science depends on your choice of film simulation. This is the Fujifilm XF35mm f2 lens. It's weather resistant like the camera, so makes a good pairing. Film simulation is a real differentiator for Fujifilm, particularly for those of us old enough to remember analog film. Rather than selecting a color profile for a scene like landscape, you choose a film type like Astia, which has a softer response, or Velvia for more saturated colors. And this is so cool. If you're old enough to have slipped the end of a carton of film into the back of a camera to remember what type of film was loaded, the back display on the X-Pro3 may make your heart beat faster. Other commentators have not been kind to the LCD display, but the flip-out, up-facing screen is reminiscent of a reflex camera with a waist-level viewfinder. It also swivels all the way down. Now, granted, while it may be useful for low-angle shooting, it's not useful for much else. If you're not happy shooting with a viewfinder, you're probably better to look for another model. But before you do that, consider this optical rangefinder. You're not looking through the lens, so you'll see the lens in the bottom right, and it's a big screen. Without my glasses, I have to scan around to see the edges. This recording's taken with an iPhone placed inside the eye cup on a rig that's a little shaky, so please accept my apology for that. The scene coverage is larger than any lens. This is the Fujifilm 35mm. The white rectangle shows the approximate image area. With the Fujifilm 16 to 55mm lens at 16mm, the approximate imaging area is indicated by the four corner squares. And as you zoom in, the size of the imaging rectangle changes. Press the disk button on the back to overlay the settings. And if you're finding the display a little small, use the menu. Yes, it appears in the optical viewfinder display to select large indicators. This screen can be customized using the disk custom setting to add, for example, a level and a histogram, providing both the best looking and the most useful optical display I've seen. Take an image, and the thumbnail display is in the bottom right. That's actually optional. You can also select to display the image on the full display or not see it at all. To see the actual through-the-lens view, use the switch on the front to switch to the electronic viewfinder. It's a 3.7 million dot OLED that refreshes at 100 frames with a 1 to 5000 contrast ratio. It has its own options, so let's add the level and histogram to that. Okay, before I get in too deep, let me back up. The X-Pro3 has style. In my opinion, this is a classy, elegant, and well thought out design. And although its appeal is somewhat retro, it also seems quite modern. This is the basic black version. According to Fujifilm, the weatherproof body is magnesium. The top and the bottom plates are titanium. An alternate black and a silver option have a scratch-proof Duratech coating. Those options are a little more expensive. The body weighs 447 grams, about the same as the X-Pro2 model, and with this lens, a little over 600 grams total. The front and back grips are small, but suitable for the camera's size and weight. The on-off switch, an integrated shutter button with cable release screw, as well as the front and back settings dials are positioned so that my fingers find them naturally. There's a multifunctional switch on the front, used to change between optical and electronic viewfinder, but also to change other viewfinder options. There are two discrete custom function buttons, one on the back thumb rest, another on the top panel. They're customized in the menu, along with the button on the viewfinder switch. And here you'll also find settings to assign functions to the touchscreen's 4 swipe motions. The diopter dial adjusts enough to accommodate my prescription, so I can shoot without my glasses. On the right side, 2 SD card slots. UHS 2 is supported. On the left, USB-C and a 2.5mm mic or remote connector. The screen on the back can also display the camera's settings, with independent and customizable settings for stills and video. There's no control circle, there's a menu OK button, and a joystick for navigation, both for the menu and to move the focus spot. The Q key opens a quick menu. The X-Pro3 does not have a PASM exposure mode dial. Set the aperture using the ring on the lens. If you want auto aperture, use the A position. Set the shutter speed with the top dial, 1/8000 to 1 second. T timer selects a longer duration. Press and turn the back dial up to 15 minutes. The B or bulb setting keeps the shutter open as long as the shutter's held down, up to 30 minutes. And turn to A for auto shutter. There is a lock on this dial, but it's only needed to exit auto mode. I wish it was also needed to enter auto mode. Inside the shutter dial is a second display for the ISO setting. Lift and turn the dial to set 160 to 12,800. The C position transfers ISO control to the front dial, which adds both lower 125/180 as well as higher settings 25,600, 51,200. At 12,800, images capture dark scenes nicely. At 25.6, the noise is more noticeable, but the image retains good detail. At 51.2, details dissolve into mush and the noise level exceeds my limit. Like the other exposure settings, there's an A position for Auto ISO. Configure the Auto ISO parameters in the menu. There are 3. Each has a default setting, a maximum, which can be set up to 12.8, and a minimum shutter speed. When one or more of the exposure settings are in auto, the exposure compensation dial provides a 3 up and 3 down latitude. That's displayed screen left. Turn the dial to C and use the front dial for a 5 up and down adjustment. When the exposure controls are not in their A positions, the exposure compensation display is a meter. Incidentally, to access shutter speeds between the one-stop gradations on the dial, use the back dial for 1 2/3 up and down. The photometry setting selects the meter type, multi, center weighted, spot, and average. However, when face detection is on, it overrides the meter mode. The dimmed photometry with face icon is the clue. Most of what's been added to Fujifilm's firmware for other recent releases, like pre-shot, sports finder, focus bracketing, color chrome effect, digital microprism, appear here also. I'll cover those as we get to the related systems, but there are some additions which I'll mention first. Highlight and shadow adjustments are now made using an interactive tone curve, so you see the effect as you make the changes, both on a tone curve as well as in the image. The joystick controller is used to brighten or darken the shadow areas or the highlights. This does not change the overall dynamic range, but is an effective way to decrease contrast with a flatter curve or increase it with a steeper one. These are the same adjustments found on the Q menu. This is a simpler way to access them. A new clarity setting with an 11-step range joins the sharpness control to increase definition. A new film negative simulation, Classic, identified as providing enhanced color with hard tonality, has been added. Now, I find it difficult to create side-by-side comparisons, but all these images were taken with the Classic negative setting. The grain effect now has size options for coarser or finer grains. Using large makes the effect a little more apparent. The color chrome effect to increase color tones for highly saturated colors is now joined by the color chrome effects blue to improve the rendering of blues. Multi-exposure has been substantially upgraded. Up to 9 images can be combined using 4 techniques to superimpose. Use the menu to select the technique. Average seems right for my multi-tulip project. Take the image, press OK to accept, and then configure and align the next image. Screen left keeps track of your progress. And when you're done, press Disp and the image is saved. There are some changes and updates to the menu system. I expect we'll see those features on all Fujifilm cameras going forward, and some may be applied to older cameras with firmware updates. The Q menu now has a transparent background. Or not. It's a button dial setting, not a screen option. With the transparent menu, the settings are interactive, so you can see the change when you change the aspect ratio, select a film simulation, or adjust the saturation. One up is the quick menu option. Previously, Q menu was fixed at 12 options. On the X-Pro3, it can be customized for as many as 16 options, and as few as 4. There are 32 settings that can be assigned to the Q menu to simplify access to settings you use infrequently but don't want to dive into the menu to find, like the eye detect settings or high-speed video record. The X-Pro3 adds the ability to limit the focus range, which may help focus find its goal more quickly. Presets limit the range from 2 or 5 meters to infinity. I looked for an on-screen icon to indicate this feature was active, but didn't find one. That would be useful. Custom can be set by adjusting the lens's focus ring or touching an on-screen object at that distance, both for the closest and the furthest focus. This capability is also reflected in the focus bracket feature, where the distance between the closest and furthest object can be similarly selected. I'll show you in a minute. Well, those are the features that have been added, but I do have to mention one thing the X-Pro3 is missing. That's an HDMI out connector. You may not miss it, but it leaves me at a disadvantage, so the quality of the menu screen captures in this video are not my usual standard. Well, let's take a look at the many ways to adjust the contrast and the dynamic range. First, the settings, then some sample images. In addition to the highlight shadow tone controls, when the ISO is at 640 or above, dynamic range can be set from 100 to 400% and auto. I assume 100 is the equivalent of off. There's an alternate setting, D-range priority, which has weak, strong, and auto settings. When any of these are selected, both dynamic range and tone control are dimmed out. On the Drive menu, the HDR Plus option takes multiple exposures and combines them for a single image. One more technique is to use the Eterna film simulation, a flat profile designed for video post-production combined with the DR 400% that also provides an enhanced dynamic range, and it's useful for video. All of those capabilities enhance your ability to manage the contrast and the dynamic range. For example, the HDR Plus captured the bulbs in this chandelier without overexposing, as other settings did. And whichever you choose, there's always a neutral RAW file, if you have that setting turned on, to make your adjustments in post. Please click to continue to the second part for details about focus, burst, and bracket, as well as video.